Hi. In this lesson, we will talk about the one good case approach to legal research, an introduction to federal regulations. We will also talk a little bit about compliance work towards the very end. All right, one good case approach to research. Now, whether you landed on a case that you got from a secondary source, or maybe you linked to a case like Oster from the notes of decisions in a statute, or maybe the partner with whom you were working just told you to start with this particular case. Cases on Westlaw provide you with a lot of tools that make you a much more powerful researcher. The tools I'm about to talk about, you should already be familiar with, but really everything that we're about to talk about is vetted information. Whether it is an editor who has classified headnotes and cases to a particular topic and key number, or whether you are looking at citing references to uncover additional documents that cited to and or analyzed your document. There's some really good tools out there that make you more efficient and really should be an approach you take. As I said in the previous lecture, the methodology, the steps you should take differ depending on the content that you are working with. For me, when I'm working with cases, the first thing I'm going to go to, I'm going to look at the summary paragraph, the synopsis, and then I'm going to scan the individual head notes, trying to pick out parts of the case that are most relevant for me. Now, when you land on a good head note, keep in mind every head note serves three purposes. Number one, it's a paraphrased summary written by an expert attorney editor of each individual issue in the case. In this instance, the judge might have, throughout the opinion, talked about the church's employees' pit bull throughout the opinion. You're not going to be searching on pit bull or German shepherd. So when the editor wrote this, if you're going to be talking about dog bite liability, you don't want to have to think about all the different types and breeds of dogs. The employee editor is going to generically say dog. So, quick glance, I know this is one of the issues that I am researching, that keeper or harborer of dogs issue. So that's the first thing that a headnote will do. Second thing that every headnote does, every single headnote from every single case has been classified somewhere in the West topic and key number system. As you know, it's simply a gigantic index of all American case law. Currently, there are close to 500 main legal topics. Animals happens to be topic number 28 on that alphabetical list. And this specific point of law, very granular, it has been classified to the topic animals, subtopic key number 66, injuries to persons. Subtopic under that is 66.5, because there could be various animals that have caused injuries to persons, right? And the subtopic under that, 66.5 parent 7. Now, with one click, I'm going to be able to get every case in Connecticut or any jurisdiction, since that topic and key number is homogeneous from one jurisdiction to the next. And we're going to do that in a second. I said there are three things that a headnote provides you. The last, and this is really a neat feature. Look, Oster is an excellent case in Connecticut regarding that keeper issue, owners of dogs and their liability for dog bites. I may want to get other cases that analyze and support Oster as good law for that specific issue, right? Well, I could go up to citing references. There are 188 documents total that have cited to Oster. 82 of them are cases. I could start from there and try to filter down. But one of the nice things that Westlaw does is, of the 82 cases that cite to Oster, 20 cite to it for that specific issue. One click, I get those 20 cases. We're going to do that in a second, but before I do, I want to take you into that topic and key number search, as I said. And remember the difference between these two searches. This search will give you every single case in Connecticut classified to the topic animals, subtopic dogs, persons liable for injuries in general. This click or search will give you only cases that cited to Oster for this specific point of law. So there is a difference there. When you run a topic and key number search, as I said, by default, it's going to run that search in the jurisdiction where the case you started from was from. You could simply change this and run this in any jurisdiction because, as I said, this topic and key number is going to be homogeneous from one jurisdiction to the next. Another really good tip to remember, these are going to be listed in reverse chronological order. You are always going to want to get the seminal case listed first. So if you sort them by most cited, you're going to see that Falby is the seminal case in Connecticut on this issue. It's been cited 62 times. I do see a potential problem with Falby. It has an orange marker letting me know that Falby has been indirectly overruled by Santo Pietro because Falby relied on a case which, when the Falby court decided it, one of the cases it relied upon was still good, but in the intervening years, Santo Pietro has invalidated some of the authority that Falby relied upon. Does this mean that I can't use Falby? Absolutely not. Just like with red flags, just because a case has a red flag doesn't mean you can't use it. Same thing with an orange marker. If Falby had been indirectly overruled for an issue that you are not concerned with, every other issue is in play. And by the way, we don't have time to really go into this in this lecture, but I did take a look at Falby, and the reason Santo Pietro indirectly overruled it was for a civil procedure issue, not the dog bite issue. So all the dog bite issues in Falby are still valid, and you're able to use it. But just something that I wanted to throw in there in case you had some confusion. But really, one of the things you will always want to do when you run a topic and key number search is get the seminal case listed. And sorting by most cited will do that for you. All right, let's go back to the head note itself. Head note number 4. And as I said, one click, I can get every case that's cited to Oster for issue number 4. Remember, these cases are going to be listed by depth. You always want to get the general rule, the more green bars, the better. 4 and 3 bar references are really going to be cases that substantially analyze your case. A 2 or 1 bar reference, well, 1 bar references I wouldn't read at all. They don't analyze your case at any point, but a 2 bar reference will actually discuss your case for less than a paragraph. So you really want to be looking for those 4 and 3 bar references. Final thing I want you to be aware of, and this is a really good tool to start using when doing case law research. Citing references are forward-looking, if you think about it. Citing references would give me every case from March 26, 2008 going forward, right? Our case was decided March 25th of 2008. Citing references would give me every case from that date forward that has ever cited to Oster. Or maybe I landed on Oster and didn't read any Connecticut Practice Series articles. I could click that link and get a good foundation in those secondary sources we talked about in the previous lesson. But the point here is citing references are forward-looking. Table of authorities, on the other hand, is inward-looking. Table of authorities, when you are viewing a case, will give you an alphabetical list of every case that this court relied upon when they wrote their decision. Just with one click, I get the 23 cases that the Oster court relied upon when they wrote this particular opinion. So that's actually another way for you to get some good information on a case. If you have a case that's really, really important and crucial, you want to maybe take a look at the table of authorities. All right, let's move on. I wanted to quickly pivot and talk about regulations. And in particular, I'm going to focus on federal regulations right now. We don't have enough time to talk about state and federal, although pretty much what I'm talking about with respect to federal regulations, the same applies to state regulations. Now, from the Westlaw homepage, you're going to see in that first column two links that I think are important for those of you doing regulations related research. And this is really the third branch of government that a lot of times in law school you kind of forget is out there. You focus on the judicial branch, cases, the legislative branch, statutes, but you forget about the executive branch, regulations and administrative decisions and guidance. I think those go hand in hand. Some of you are going to be going into practices that are heavily regulated. Anybody deciding to get into environmental work, finance and banking, health law, tax, securities, all heavily regulated. So, if you're going into those types of areas, not only you're going to be dealing with regulations, you're going to be dealing with the appropriate federal and state agencies as well. This particular lecture, I'm not going into detail on administrative decisions and guidance, but I want you to be aware that those usually go hand in hand. Now, from a federal perspective, when we talk about regulations, there are two types of resources you might have heard, bandied about. The first resource, you might have heard of something called the Federal Register. What is the Federal Register? Well, the Federal Register chronologically publishes proposed, temporary, and final regulations. Code of Federal Regulations, on the other hand, is going to classify those regulations by subject matter. And just going back to another resource that you're already familiar with, just so I can give you a little bit of an analogy here. Think about it from a statutes perspective, federal statutes in particular. The U.S. Statutes at Large database or the U.S. Public Laws database, either one of them will chronologically publish all statutes enacted by Congress. Now, we don't search statutes that way. We search by subject matter. So the U.S. Code is going to classify every statute by subject matter. We have 50 plus titles in the U.S. Code. That's sort of the analogy that I wanted to draw on when it comes to regulations, federal regulations. The Federal Register chronologically publishes those regulations. The CFR is really where we're going to be doing most of our work because the CFR is going to classify those regulations by subject matter. Now, a couple of ways of getting into federal regulations. I mean, if I knew that I was dealing with a tax regulation, I could just drill into Title 26, run a word search if I didn't know what I was looking for, or keep drilling until I got to my regulation. Another way would be to find them by citation. And sometimes I have students who ask me, why do we need to worry about regulations? Well, regulations have pretty much equal weight of authority. I mean, we tend to forget, or students sometimes tend to forget that third branch of government. But as I said earlier, depending on where you are going into practice, you're probably going to be dealing with regulations every day. And even if you go into a general practice, you'll have to take a look at regulations from time to time, whether it's on a federal, state, or municipal level. They really do, they really are an important part of the modern day practice. And to answer the question, hey, why do I need regulations? can't the state legislature or Congress just enact all the laws that we need to worry about? No. I mean, oftentimes the agencies are going to be better suited to enforce those laws than a legislative body. And a really cute example I have is there's actually a federal regulation that defines ketchup. Okay, so and really, if you think about it, would we want to leave Congress up with the decision on what the definition of ketchup is? I mean, I don't think the current Congress could actually come to a consensus on how best to spell ketchup, because everyone knows it's Ketchup, not catsup, but whatever. But that's just an example of why sometimes why legislative bodies have sort of left some of the dirty work, if you will, the nitty gritty work, up to an agency. Let's talk about sort of the methodology that you'd use when working with a reg. And a lot of the tips I'm giving you here really align with what I talked about for statutes in the prior lesson. The first thing that you're going to look at when you pull up a state or federal regulation is, the effective date. Am I looking at the proper version of this regulation? Is this the one that is going to cover or help me answer my client's question? This is a regulation under FERPA, the Federal Education Rights Privacy Act, and maybe I'm looking to see if university disciplinary records can be disclosed under the law enforcement exception. And I landed on this particular reg. How did I land on this reg? Well, again, like we talked about in the previous lecture, I could have done just a word search, gotten some good background in secondary sources, and linked into the statute and regulation. Or, someone might have directed me to this particular statute under FERPA. And one of the things I mentioned when talking about statutes, that one of the 5 steps that you look to when researching a statute, are there accompanying regs that come into play? So when I look at a statute, I always hover over citing reference to see those regulations. Or, here's a quicker tip. Under context and analysis, this is information vetted by attorney editors. They are telling me that, wow, there's only one regulation in the CFR. No, they're telling you some of the better regulations, law review commentaries, treatises, and practice aids to use. This is a good starting point if you don't want to be overwhelmed by the 362 regs that cite to or derive their authority from this particular statute. So if I had come here and clicked on Code of Federal Regs, the attorney editors are telling me, hey, if you're doing statutory research on FERPA, you probably also want to take a look at 34 CFR 99.1 et seq. There's a number of regs classified there that could help me answer my client's question. So whether you got to this regulation from a secondary source or from what I just did, linking from a statute, the important parts to a reg: 1, effective date. 2, does your regulation have a red flag or a yellow flag? Now, if you don't know what a red flag or yellow flag mean for a case, statute, or reg, I haven't shown you this tip yet, but if you click on that little Keysight logo on the browsing bar, it actually explains exactly what each flag and marker mean for each type of content category. So if you see a yellow flag for a reg, it means that there are proposed regulations out there that, if passed, could affect your particular regulation. All right, that's the second item that is important. Third item, Like I said earlier with statutes, if you land on a regulation, click the table of contents and see if there are surrounding sections that also come into play that might help you answer your client's situation. Another really good tip, if this is going to be a part or subpart I'm going to be in over and over again, download that PDF, put it on your desktop. You'll have a hyperlink to get right back into any one of these regs at any point in time. Third item that is important. I could read this reg and kind of decide how it applies to my client's situation, but like with statutes, what I think isn't as important as what courts have said. So like you would with statutes, when you're looking at a federal reg, go to the notes of decisions. These are going to be vetted cases that attorneys thought provided substantial analysis of this particular regulation. And again, like with statutes, the attorneys, the editors have actually given us a table of contents. So if I'm only interested in cases that analyzed this reg for the law enforcement exception for university disciplinary records, I've got some really good cases I could link to right from here. And keep in mind that this, like I said with statutes, the notes of decisions is not a complete list of every case that ever analyzed this statute. If I went to citing references, there are another 51. There are 103 total cases that analyzed 99.31. And by the way, if I wanted to get administrative guidance that cited back to this particular reg, I could do that. If I wasn't comfortable with this area of law and I wanted a good foundation, I could go to secondary sources. So, everything I need is going to be right there. Now, the fifth item that is really, really important when you land on a regulation, every regulation that you will read, whether it's a state reg or federal reg, has to derive its authority from a statute. On Westlaw, it's really easy to get the enabling legislation. If you scroll to the end of your regulation in the credits section, by the way, credits for a statute or reg really is, I think of this as the lifeblood of your statute or reg in this instance, telling you when the reg was created and how often it has been amended over the years. But when you look at a state or federal reg, right under the credits, you will always see the authority. So the authority for this particular regulation, the enabling statute, if you will, is 20 USCA 1232G. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to regs. Now, the other thing I think is important for you all to be aware of, some of you are going to be going into firms and corporations that will make you do a lot of compliance and risk work. You have to advise clients on potential changes to regulations that could affect their businesses. So, if you're working for an insurance company or healthcare provider or a law firm that represents a bank, you're always going to want to stay on top of any regulatory changes or statutory changes. I mean, this is really the foundation of compliance work. So I wanted to quickly give you sort of 5 tips, if you will, for those of you doing compliance work. Tip number 1, when working with a statute or regulation on Westlaw, you pull it up, you have a compare versions button right on the browsing bar. So this will actually give me an ability to advise a client on how a regulation changed over time. So if you pull up a statute or reg, and let's say it just got amended a couple of weeks ago, and you need to quickly see what changed, One click in Westlaw is going to do that for you. Now, when you click like I just did, what it's going to do is pull up the current version of the reg and the next most recent previous version and let you know what changed. You might want to take a look and see what changed over time from the earliest available version on Westlaw. Now, for statutes, we go back 23 years. For regulations, we go back to 2010. Okay, so let's say that I wanted to compare the current version of this reg with the oldest available version that was in effect up through 2009. Looks like we're going back a little further now than we did. Look at that. Just one click, Westlaw's telling us there are 38 total differences, 27 deletions designated by red cross out, 11 additions designated by the green, aqua green highlighting. And if you want to turn the colors off, you use the double brackets minus and plus to designate deletions and additions. So that's something that you will definitely be doing and advising clients on for compliance related work. Another thing that you should be aware of, another icon that comes into play and is used oftentimes by those attorneys doing compliance work, is something called Keysight Alert. It's the icon that looks like a bell on Westlaw. Keysight Alert will track a citation for you, whether it is a case, statute, or reg, and it's going to let you know of any future positive and or negative references. So this statute or this regulation that we're looking at, by the way, it doesn't have a yellow flag letting us know that there are proposed changes, but if it did, I would certainly set up a Keysight Alert and let Westlaw track and let me know of any further movement in that regulation. As it is, even though it doesn't have a red flag or a yellow flag, if this is going to be important regulation for you to, track over time, it might be worth setting it up nonetheless. All right, so that's one tip I would give you for compliance work. Second tip, whether you are doing statutes or regulations related work, you're going to have access to something called 50 state surveys. I just drilled into regulations and you'll see under tools and resources 50 state regulatory surveys. But what this does for us, it gives us an ability to get all of the regulations from all 50 states dealing with any topic and or subtopic that is out there. So one quick click, I could get all of the record keeping regulations from all 50 states for money services. Look at that. One list. And if a state doesn't have any, we're going to let you know that. And by the way, if any of these regs had changed, we'd let you know that as well. We would carry through red and yellow Keysight information. So whether you're looking at regulations or statutes, you're going to have access to 50 state surveys. Just a real nice group of databases. So drug testing. Let's say that you are, you have a client who does business in multiple states, and you need to make sure they are in compliance with the drug testing statutes and regs for all 50 states. One click, I can get all of that information. Another related database that a lot of you are not aware of are called regulatory summaries. These are very similar to 50 state statutory and 50 state regulatory surveys, but regulatory guidance summaries, if you go to 50 state regulatory surveys and you don't see one out there, you might want to try 50 regulatory guidance summaries, because what these will do is something similar. It's going to give me an ability to just pull up all of the regulations from each state individually on a specific area of law. Again, rather than you running a search trying to get all of the statutes and regs in Connecticut dealing with e-commerce, this does this for you. Okay, another tip. I talked about this earlier, but administrative decisions and guidance are often something that those of you doing compliance work will have to look into. And fourth tip, practice areas. Now, if you're going into a specific practice area, you definitely will want to take a look at your practice area's topical page, because often you're going to get a lot of good information here. Here are those regulatory guidance summaries I mentioned earlier, and within the healthcare industry. Final tip, and my favorite one, and one that if you are a 1L, you are certainly not familiar with this, but practical law is a legal know-how tool. It is going to give you expert guidance, like having an attorney sitting next to you for various litigation-based and transaction-based tasks you've been assigned to do. This is something that if you go to a firm and they have practical law, they can't bill the time that it takes you to do this research. Practical law is not something that firms can bill back to clients. So it's a really good sandbox, if you will, for you to learn about a particular practice area. In fact, I know of a number of firms that actually, if you get assigned to a particular practice department, they actually make you go here first and read all of the documents for your particular department before they train you. But when you go to practical law, it's set up a lot like a large law firm's practice area, litigation, antitrust, finance, corporate, real estate, etc. Some of the resource types I quickly want to highlight for you. Practice notes are like secondary sources that in 10 or 15 minutes are designed to give you a good foundation in a task you've been assigned to research. Standard documents are actually going to be documents drafted by expert attorneys on the various subject matters that I showed you in the practice areas segment a few minutes ago. The best part about standard documents are they're going to be drafting notes throughout each document. Those are the attorney speaking directly to you. So for example, if you had to draft a non-compete agreement that complied with Florida law, there is one out there that is maintained by the attorney who drafted it, and he or she has included drafting notes in each section, letting you know why it's structured that way in this state. So, for example, in Florida, there's a consideration provision that might be different than consideration in other states. He or she has told you why it's drafted that way. The third type of resource that you would use a lot are checklists. Those are designed to make sure you've done your due diligence. So if you're doing compliance work, checklists are really important. But if you are doing compliance work, scroll towards the bottom of the screen, and on the right-hand side under Resource Centers, click on In-House Resource Center, and our practical law editors have created, for those of you doing compliance work, a compliance center, and they have amassed a toolkit organized by topic of all the different compliance related materials available on practical law. It is just an awesome resource, and one that, as I said, you're probably most likely going to see this wherever you go, because it actually is, practical law is just as popular, if not more popular, than Westlaw. In firms, we do sell it as a separate package. You enjoy access to it throughout your law school career. And for those of you at practice-ready schools like BC, you'll have access to this and Westlaw for a year and a half post-graduation. So your school pays for you to have that access, additional access separately. Hope this was helpful. I went a little bit longer than the first lesson, but there's a lot of good resources there, and good luck.